images of woman made. Where do I go to find images of woman made? Yeah, all of humanity is woman born.
Hello, everybody. My name is Amy Doyle, and I'm going to read a story called It All Happened with Jean Doyle. It all started with Jean Doyle. My mother was born into an America that only 5 years earlier had denied women the right to vote. She would not be a feminist, my mother, and loved to quote William Golding, who said, "Women are foolish to pretend they are equal to men. They are far superior." Feminism did not speak to her. She was a woman who not only had it all, what with a full-time job at Auburn Correctional Facility and 13 children, she had too much. She found a much more relevant role model in the Blessed Mother, who, like my mother, was poor and had mysterious powers of fertility. My mother may have taken secret pride in Mary, delighting in the fact, as did Sojourner Truth, that Christ came from God and a woman. Man ain't had nothing to do with it. But when I left for college at a public university after having attended Catholic school for 13 years, my mother half-jokingly said, "That school is a hotbed of paganism. Make sure you go to Mass." I declared my major to be women's studies, which was bad news, not just because of the pitiful job prospects. "Now don't forget your faith when those abortionists try to cast their spells on you," she wrote in a letter half-jokingly. But she admired feminism's other social justice goals and sought occasions to discuss things she thought I might find interesting. In another letter, she described a special she'd watched on PBS with a, quote, very well-spoken African-American playwright named August something or other. She really got my attention one day with her report of a public notice she'd seen in The Citizen. In a message on my answering machine, she said, "Amy, dear, there's something in the paper today about an organization. Let's see. Oh, they call themselves the USA Nationalist Party. Apparently," she said with an unrelenting Central New York short A, "they're a neo-Nazi group. In any event, they've gotten a permit from City Hall to hold a parade on September 25th. Okay, love ya." I wasn't alone when I played the message. I'd just come from a study of the Communist Manifesto with a group of friends I'd known since freshman year, when we shared a collective liberal identity that involved peace sign earrings, hacky sacks, and weed, all of which we brought to the March for Women's Lives in April 1989. We eventually eschewed what we judged to be ineffective liberal politics for more radical theory and direct activism, a shift that required a pack of Marlboro Lights to analyze some of the more arcane socialist theories of Lenin and Trotsky. Tie-dye t-shirts and Birks were out. Motorcycle jackets and Doc Martens were in. Slogans like, "My body, my choice," out. "I fuck to come, not to conceive," in. We had all just settled into my apartment for some chain smoking when I played my mother's message about the impending neo-Nazi demonstration in Auburn. My friends had visited me during summer breaks from school, and it was only then that I noticed some of the remarkable features of my hometown. One, a maximum security prison squatted right in the middle. This arrangement had never seemed weird to me. My mother was a third-shift switchboard operator there and was able to walk to work. The prison itself wasn't half as scary as the bars she had to pass on her way there. Once, a group of drunks threw a bottle of beer on her, my 50-something-year-old mother walking alone at 11 p.m. in her LL Bean Storm Chaser parka. 2 pages of her diary were devoted to a description of the harrowing episode, with a coda epitomizing the humor that both minimized her struggles and made them survivable. "This drink's on Jean Doyle," she wrote half-jokingly. But if my mother walked 2 miles past the prison, she would have arrived at its antithesis, the home of freedom warrior Harriet Tubman. My college visitors, many of them from New York City, were impressed that Harriet Tubman had settled in Auburn when she came north. They had each asked to visit the historical landmark when they were in town, but I didn't know how to do it. I, like most of the people born and raised in Auburn, had never been. Meanwhile, almost everyone in town knew someone who worked in the prison. The population of this prison, like all prisons in America where the incarceration rate is higher than even in China, is mostly minorities. Legal scholar Michelle Alexander has written, "Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination are suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America. We have merely redesigned it." "Play that again," my friend Yvette insisted. The news did not improve with a second airing. A neo-Nazi group was, in fact, marching in my hometown. I felt ashamed of my community and responsible for its ignorance, its hatred, its trashiness. My degree, my activism, the loads of books I bought and sometimes read on racial justice didn't matter. The message confirmed what my questionable teeth hinted at: podunk, paint chip eating redneck. Harriet Tubman being 3 miles away didn't mean shit. "Okay," Yvette said, smushing a just-lit cigarette. "All out to Auburn. I can fit 2 more in my car besides Amy." The ride along Route 20 between Albany and Auburn was lined with orchards sparsely dotted with early McIntosh and likely noisy with the bustle of bees and butterflies. In the back seat of Yvette's car, I smoked and dreamed dreamy thoughts like, is it true that the flutter of one butterfly can cause a typhoon halfway around the world? "Amy, where do the young people hang out?" Yvette interrupted. "The young people? What do you mean?" I really couldn't imagine what she was driving at. Unlike the towns in Long Island where my friends lived, Auburn didn't have a diner scene or underage clubs. When I was in middle school, I used to go to Riva Rollerdrome, but I knew she didn't mean that. Where did the young people hang out? Did we even have such a demographic? "Well," I said, suddenly inspired, "there's a community center where a lot of African Americans hang out." I shuddered from the aftertaste of African American. If I was really comfortable with black people, wouldn't I have just said black? When we pulled up to the community center, there were a dozen or so African American kids playing tag with a teenage playground director. In my 13 years of Catholic school, I had never had a black classmate, but I led my more cosmopolitan friends, Filipina Yvette and Jewish Adam, inside the building with feigned casualness. Soon we found someone in charge with whom we shared the purpose of our visit. "We need to mobilize a mass counter-protest to the fascists who are planning to march on the Harriet Tubman Memorial in Auburn on Yom Kippur," Adam said by way of introduction. I secretly thought it must have been a coincidence that the march was scheduled for the Jewish High Holy Day because Auburn really didn't have any Jews, did it? The man smiled and nodded. "We know all about it, but we don't want to dignify this with any kind of response whatsoever. We are telling everyone to avoid the protest area and just go on down to the Tomato Fest happening at the lake same day." I thought this sounded like a good plan. I wasn't nearly as hungry for confrontation as my friends, and I wanted to smoke anyway. But they weren't ready to surrender, so they persisted with persuasive points, including subtle phrases like, "shut down the Nazi scum," and "by any means necessary." The man just smiled and urged us to go to Tomato Fest. In the next 3 weeks, my friends, sometimes with me but mostly without, drove to central New York from Albany to meet up with student groups at Oswego, Cornell, SU, Ithaca, and Cortland. By the 25th of September, they had organized thousands of counter-protesters from places as far away as Detroit, requiring hundreds of police and riot gear to defend the handful of neo-Nazis who showed up for their demonstration. But in addition to these outsiders, regular folks from the East Side and the West Side had decided to go to Tomato Fest a little late. For an hour, the thousands chanted on the same streets I used to cross on the way home from the Y. The only time so many people were united like this was for the home high school football games. But here we were, crowding the intersections so traffic was blocked. Protesters of all stripes joined in each other's chants. The more respectable ones shouted, "No anti-Semite KKK, no racist, sexist USA," and the younger militants provoked with, "Death, death, death to the Klan." And as I shouted along with the thousands of friends and strangers, I thought, Jean Doyle started all of this. Damn. The fascists asserted their First Amendment right for a mere 5 minutes before being shut down because the police could no longer protect them from the prodigious crowd. So determined were they to beat feet, they left one of their own behind. Soon, a crowd of 50 protesters were chasing the lone wolf up a street until he disappeared inside a stranger's house. The next morning, I had coffee with Mom and regaled her with more tales of the previous day's adventure. She interrupted me, though, to read aloud the story on the front page of the Citizen about the neo-Nazi who'd been left by his friends but was taken in by a Jewish resident who saw the mob closing in on him. "I didn't know we had any Jewish people in Auburn," I said. "Of course we have Jewish people. What do you think we are, a bunch of hillbillies?" So many years later, that day is still part of the collective memory here. We remember it, most remember it as the day a diverse and unified we drove the Nazis out of town, a perfect purging before we could come together as a community for the first of our now annual Tomato Fest. On the 25th anniversary, an original play commemorating the day that Auburn came together to kick those bastards out was performed in a new public theater that also produced the Vagina Monologues, and for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, a place where the young people now hang out. For my friend Yvette, it was just the beginning of a career as a political activist. In 2017, she trounced the mocking logic of Tucker Carlson in a Fox News interview about shutting down a speech of alt-right leader Milo Yiannopoulos at UC Berkeley. My mother, who could never insert herself into a narrative as its hero, always recalled it as a modern-day Good Samaritan story. But I remember it as the day that my mother, a devout Catholic who by the end of her life overlooked the pro-choice position of Barack Obama and enthusiastically cast her final presidential vote, who was alive to hear Pope Francis welcome gays and lesbians into the church, who was born into a world that only allowed women the right to vote for 5 years. And she started some good trouble in our little town, good trouble that starts, in the words of poet Marge Piercy, when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more. Thank you.